All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy International Women's Day. And welcome to our webinar, Breaking Biases and Creating an Inclusive Culture in the Workspace. I am Dr. Jenya Dudareva, Senior Engagement Manager in Intelligent Automation Practice at Bernie Group. And today I'm joined by Ajanta, who is a Senior Associate at Bernie Group. And both of us will be moderating today's webinar. A quick housekeeping note, we are recording the webinar today, so all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please use the chat function in the lower area of your screen, as we will be answering your questions. And if we run out of time during Q&A, we can also answer anything remaining in our follow-up email when we share the recording of the webinar. Now I'd like to turn over to Ajanta to introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Jenya. So first off, we have David Bernie, the principal and founder at Bernie Group. He founded Bernie Group in 2011 to help organizations dramatically improve their operations. It has since become one of the fastest growing management consulting firms in Canada. Next up, thank you, Dave. Lana El Senora, software developer at Amazon. Lana has explored many facets of the computer science domain. She's an author and software engineer at Amazon, where she works on supply chain optimization technologies. In addition to this, she has led several initiatives to better the experience of women in computer science. Welcome, Lana. We have Tanya Jeffers-McAllister. She's the head of the Advice Center at RBC Insurance. Tanya is a trusted leader, mentor, and coach who specializes in leading large teams, creating and implementing innovative strategies, engaging stakeholders, and developing new leaders. With a passion for social justice, she's an active ally, championing DEI initiatives at RBC. Welcome, Tanya. Next up, we have Trisha Nkedia, Director of Data Governance and Quality at CCP Investments. Trisha is responsible for the development, implementation, and oversight of the data management and governance framework, including the standards, practices, processes, technology, and training. In addition to this, she's a board member of Skills for Life, a not-for-profit that helps youth develop life skills, including financial literacy, experiential learning, and career development. Welcome.
Hello.
Marco Osso, VP Employee Success at Tulip. Marco has over 20 years of experience in HR, focusing on recruitment, retention, talent management, and strategy. He has worked in financial institutions, the public sector, and technology, and enjoys transforming the employee experience. Welcome, Marco. Last but certainly not least, we have Marie Weiss, president and co-founder of Marketing Copilot. Marie is a marketing strategist who focuses on marketing automation and the digital transformation of the sales and marketing functions. She's the host of Women Talk Tech, a podcast on the state of women in the technology sector.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome.
Welcome, and thank you so much in advance to all our panelists for joining. This year's International Women's Day theme is Break the Bias. So today we'll be discussing deliberate or unconscious biases that make it difficult for women to move ahead in the workplace. Knowing that bias exists isn't simply enough. Action is needed to move the needle on creating more equitable workplaces. So with that being said, we'll move into our Q&A. So to start off, I'd love for our panelists to set the stage for today's webinar and talk briefly about what bias is and how it manifests in organizations.
I think I can take a stab at it, and then everybody can feel free to jump in. I think that bias, as we know, is what our perception is around stereotype or opinions that we possess that are not necessarily founded in fact. And I think we need to take a look at two things, especially when we speak of the workplace: systemic racism and bias. So that means processes that have been set up or policies that are set up in place that are to exclude certain groups originally. I think we have to acknowledge that our Canadian history does include a lot of that. And that when we experience these things in the workplace, it is also a remnant of that fact. Also, there's the unconscious bias where with our very best intentions, we look to make decisions, wholeheartedly, but not recognizing that we all have unconscious bias within us, where we look at certain people, certain groups, certain upward mobility from a perspective of unconscious bias. And I think when we think about the workplace, that is something that we definitely need to speak about. And I'm very pleased that today we're having this discussion to help educate and create that change.
And just to add on to what Tanya was saying, although a lot of these things happen in the workplace, they also start off pretty early on. Like from my experience, I've just started work, but being in high school and undergrad, you do see some of these biases do come against women, whether they tell you that you only got accepted to a program because you were a woman, even though you did get, really good grades in the classes that you were taking, or whether it be needing to show all of your credentials before you start a presentation, because you kind of need to prove your qualifications before you address the crowd. Like all of these things are ways that we as women try to combat bias, but at the same time, because it's so unconscious, it's also up to our fellow colleagues and friends to think about the unconscious biases that they have and try to challenge it as well.
Absolutely. I know, like we talk about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tanya.
Oh, no, of course. Go ahead.
No, I know, like similar to what Lana mentioned, is that we talk about, like, right now we're always focusing on, like, what's happening right now. And I think it's like she mentioned, it's very important to get to people when they're very young. For myself, like, I've been working in tech a good portion of my career, but I didn't really see myself. And I see a lot of women in tech. As I was growing up, I kind of fell into that role. So I think it's really important to make sure that, we get the resources and the training and all that to the youth as early as possible, so they can see the possibilities. So, and also see that, what that women can be in tech, or women can be in certain role, women can be in leadership. So then it resonates with them, and it comes up with something that they want to pursue long-term as well. So it doesn't become, oh, I can't do this, or men would say, oh, we don't want women in tech. Like, it just becomes part of how we normalize things.
Yeah, it's what we see is what we can be.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a very concrete example to that. So when I was taking my first computer science course in high school, my mom was next to me and she was saying, hey, why don't you take this course? And I was like, no, I don't think I'd like it. She said, well, your aunt, does computer science. I really think you'd be a good computer scientist. And that's why I took that course. And now I am, working in this domain. But my mom had a reference point of a successful female
Right.
who was a leader, and that really allowed me to thrive as well.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, guys. Moving on to our second question. So all of you have been selected for this panel for your efforts in breaking the bias. My question is, what has challenged you and your efforts? And Dave, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I think that first, happy International Women's Day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And, one of the challenges that we have at Bernie Group in particular, we're a management consulting firm, mid-size, and frequently we're looking for candidates who have prior management consulting experience. So they would have worked at any of the large firms. And a challenge we're trying to overcome is that because of that approach, we implicitly take on the bias of all the other companies that are out there. So I think that Lana was talking about how things can start early. Well, now we're even further down in someone's career and they've already had a few years, and all of those biases have been in play. And so we've been trying to think through, okay, well, how do we counteract that? How do we get over that? And, we've been coming up with some creative solutions, and some of them are to try to, approach people early so that we can help to give them an opportunity, give them a leg up. And also just to be very thoughtful in our recruiting process so that we're conscious of our own biases, but also to actively search for diverse candidates. And maybe they didn't know to look for Bernie groups. Maybe we need to go and find them. So those are some of the one specific challenge as it relates to recruiting and having a diverse team that we've typically confront.
And Marie.
I'll jump in on that one. I think the most difficult thing in breaking biases is having difficult conversations. And I find that it is incredibly awkward, and I find that it is incredibly difficult to have hard conversations with people. And sometimes that's because you don't know how your message is going to be received. You don't know, if someone's going to hold that against you. And I had a job about 20 years ago in the tech sector. I'd been hired at a software company as vice president of sales. And the gentleman who hired me, who was owner of the company, was a member of a men's only golf course in which he took all of our clients to that golf course. And I was banned from attending the events and banned from playing there. And that was only 20 years ago. And I saw the bias then. I couldn't understand, quite frankly, why he hired me, because we tend to hire in our own image, which is another issue that happens in bias. And had I had the wherewithal at the time and the strength at the time, I would have gone into his office and sat down and said, "You're not helping me be successful in my job. You've created a client event that I can't attend. And you are really not, on side." And I didn't go have that conversation because I was afraid I was going to get fired. And I was afraid that he was going to dislike me for having that conversation. And in retrospect, that's the conversation I should have had. And the reason is that I ended up quitting 3 months later anyways, because the culture was so bad at the company and I hated my job, and I moved on to start my own business, quite frankly, because I was tired of being the only woman in the room all the time. And so I saw these biases very clearly, and I continued to see these biases throughout the tech sector specifically. I had started in financial services. They were very much there in financial services in the 90s. I then joined the tech sector, again, saw them in the tech sector. And, I think one of the best things that has come out of the pandemic, quite frankly, is we've blown up the office model once and for all, because oftentimes the office model comes with its own bias of who we hire, why we hire. I remember not even 5 years ago, somebody saying to me, "Well, I wouldn't hire her because she might get pregnant and have to go on maternity leave." And I think that COVID has just shattered some of these things, which I think is one of the positives to come out of it. But I think we still have so much work to do, and I sometimes find it exhausting. But I think if we can start with having difficult conversations and figuring out the best way to have those conversations without attacking, but being clear, and we can't sort of shrink back and say, "Well, I'm not going to address this issue." And just really work hard at this, at having difficult conversations. I think that's what's going to really help us on our road to cracking open the whole bias issue.
And I think organizations, to your point, Marie, also need to make a commitment to educate leaders to have those difficult conversations, and to provide them with the resources and the tools to start that. Because to your point, not everybody's comfortable with that type of conversation and perhaps steps away from it because of that. But you need to be uncomfortable to be comfortable. And I think that it also has to be a commitment by organizations to equip their leaders to have these types of conversations. Because you're right, everything starts with a conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right.
Does anyone have anything else to add, or we can move to the next question? Awesome. So I know that in conversations with a lot of you, we've heard about some of the initiatives that you've personally been involved in. What are some initiatives that you've been involved in or seen or heard about that help break the bias?
Can I lead off with that one? I think that one was, there was an organization in the tech sector a couple of years back, and I was just so incredibly impressed with the president of the company. He went out of his way to personally connect with women on LinkedIn, colleagues and people to connect and follow them and share really great content about advancing women in the tech sector. And the reason he did that, which was a slow, painful, process that took him at least a couple of years, is that when those people were ready to change careers, he would see that they might be an opportunity to come work at the company. And this was his way of getting more women into the company and getting more women into tech. And then he went one step further and he created an internal mentorship program, which paired up women with men, men with women, women with women. And he had a huge budget that he dedicated to leadership development and mentoring specifically for this reason. And I was so incredibly impressed with him and so incredibly impressed with the strategy. And, at the end of the day, you could say, well, it's a little self-serving because he was looking for talent for his company, but he didn't need to do that. And oftentimes when they would post a new job, if there were no women that applied, he'd push it back to the HR people and say, keep looking. You need to have women apply for this job. That takes real commitment. That takes real guts. And when I see what he's done, he's built an incredible network. He himself personally goes out and speaks at women's events all the time. And he's built a network of incredible women who are great leaders now, who, follow him no matter where he goes. And I think that is real leadership. And I think that is a program that I've seen that is just fantastic. I think it works. Mentoring, leadership in senior roles, and then, really pushing back if women aren't applying for jobs. If you put those three things into practice in your company, we would be really far ahead.
Yes, and just to add to that, so I really understand just how transformative mentorship is, especially when you're starting a new job. This was the first job where there was more than just one other woman on the team when I first started. And I remember when I saw there were like that many other women, I felt so much more comfortable. And my mentor, I'm always there to ask her questions, whether it's about career or about work, and it just feels really great. But some other initiatives that I think have been really great is my manager from my first day. He was very open to me about what are your career aspirations? What are the things that you want to work on? And he was telling me, so the way promotion works is you need to, have a portfolio and then you submit that for review. So we need to make sure that we give you projects that are, set you up for that promotion. And when I talked to all of my other colleagues, that's exactly what he had told them as well. This idea that when you start work at a company, you have someone who's there to support you and who wants to see you thrive and, support that long-term vision is really important. And also I found that finding ways to find support groups was really helpful. So we have a group, like a Slack channel for all of us women. We meet up every couple of weeks and we do workouts together, or we just talk, and we realized we had a lot of shared experiences. And those things really helped us just feel more comfortable. But then we realized that it wasn't enough for us to just talk with each other about our experiences. We kind of had to raise awareness to other people about that. So for this International Women's Day, the women on my team actually held an International Women's Day office hour for the entire team. And we just had this discussion where we talked about what are the issues plaguing, women in technology? What are the gender gaps? And we introduced ourselves, we shared our experiences, and we had those tough conversations. And then we led with some goals that we want to be able to have in the future. For example, we want to have every single woman interview loop certified so that everyone who is interviewing gets interviewed by at least one woman. And when you're a female candidate being interviewed by a woman and a man, you realize that there is a place for you over there. We also, so we wanted to integrate a lot of things into the mechanisms. And it was amazing that our manager was very open to hearing our conversation. And after we ended that office hour, we got really great feedback where a lot of the men on our team said, wow, I'd never known that this was an experience you had gone through, or I'd never realized the privilege that I had, going through the tech sector in my undergrad or in my work. So I feel like those experiences, first of all, knowing you have support, but also trying to share awareness with your fellow colleagues is very important. And then doing actionable items to try and address some of the systemic, the things in place that might not help you thrive very much.
Right. Yeah, and just to add to that, some of the things I've seen as well is around the training. Now, I know when we talk about training in the traditional sense, we talk about you going in and you're logging in, you complete that. What I find is that people just kind of click through and just get to the end and do the testing. Doesn't really resonate, doesn't move anything forward. What I found that's really productive is where you actually have simulation, where you go into groups and you actually stimulate situations or conversations that you want to have. And what that does is almost like it puts you in the position of where you're asking these questions, you're like, am I asking the right questions? Are there biases there? And also creates a forum where people can actually speak about things that the challenges that they're going through as well. I just think that, putting that into practice versus just as an actual training actually is very helpful as well. And I find that with people feel like, okay, oh, I understand people's point of views. I can actually speak on these things. It's also just trying to make sure that the environment is also very welcoming of those type of feedback as well, so people can speak on those things when they come up.
I found the training and spending time talking about bias can be very helpful. We had, excuse me, Lean In come in and we did a session across our organization just talking about the bias that you confront, the unconscious bias. And if you don't spend time thinking about it and recognizing that that unconscious bias is there, you don't really recognize it. And especially for those like myself, a white male, some of us, you're clueless until someone raises it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I was biased in that way. So I think that the training and helping people to understand what bias really is really important.
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you. On to our next question. So we are all responsible for quite a lot of competing priorities. How do you make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion, often called DEI initiatives, are not placed on the back burner in your organizations?
I can jump in on that one. So this, you can say it's a challenge, but it shouldn't be. Really, it starts from the top at the leadership level. So the leadership team needs to be on board with the DEI initiatives and just in general being an inclusive work environment for whatever the gender or background is of the person. So what I would say, leadership 100% needs to be on board, potentially even have some type of measurements in place for diversity and inclusion as well. I would say also, we talked a little bit about training. So, and I agree with Tricia 100%. Typically when it's that training, you go through online, you click through, that's typically the least effective type of training there is. Yeah. So you want to have discussions about these topics. You want to have real life situations where people can talk. But it's also giving some authority and accountability and empowering the entire organization as well to do things. So these can be done through employee resource groups. So at Google, we have a diversity and equity and inclusion committee. They have a certain budget to work with to work out. I have a small HR team. So, when you talk about different priorities, diversity is of course a big priority for us. But so is making sure people get paid on time and those things. So it's trying to spread out some of that work a little bit across the organization. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later in terms of hiring and retaining, but you want to hire people who have that mentality as well. So it's not a constant push to make people do this or get them to see this a certain way. You can avoid a lot of that training if you just hire people who have those same values in the first place. But I think that the big thing is leadership needs to be on board with these initiatives and programs.
Mark, I'm curious, are there ways to ensure that people are aligned to those values when you're, say, recruiting them? Or are there ways that you've seen success in doing that?
Yeah, I think typically we do incorporate our values into the hiring process in terms of just asking questions. So we have 2 or 3 questions assigned to each value, and we score the answers on that. But again, you made a very good point previously. You typically want to hire people from some of the big firms, and they come with their own biases as well. So it's almost like you're depending on those other companies to have a strong recruitment process. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And this is similar for every organization. So I'm sure I see resumes all the time. This person worked at CIBC, TD, RBC. It's like the recruiter just says, okay, they work at this bank, they're going to be a fit here. They have the experience. So, so I think, in terms of incorporating it, asking just pointed questions about what your values are, and make them provide examples of times where they've been in those situations, or they've helped people, or even just self-awareness is a big one as well.
I would just, add to this that, and I've been around a lot of organizations, big, small, and everything in between. And I think David, you made the point, if leadership isn't on side, nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing's going to change. And leadership has to be on side. They have to make a commitment to it. And it has to be more than just a page on the website. It has to be an active commitment in which there's things happening throughout the year, somebody in place who's leading this. When we did the action plan report on the Women Talk Tech podcast, we got some management consultants together who all contributed to what companies can do right now, simple steps that they can take. And we created the 2020 action plan. And, we talked to people then to find case studies, and we wanted to understand how this was playing out. And it was pretty simple. You could go to each organization and you could figure out what was working and what wasn't working, even when we offered workshops and we offered nights for people to get together and talk about, bias and different types of issues in bias and equality, and especially around pay equity and a whole bunch of things like that. And I'll tell you, if the president of the company or the leader of the company isn't on side with it, it's not going to happen. So I think first and foremost, it's great that you can test for somebody's values, but people have to lead by example. There's no other way to do it. And I'm seeing more of it now, and I love what I'm seeing, but we still have a long way to go. People have to lead by example.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be ingrained into the organization. It needs to be normalized into the organization. It can't be a reactive thing. I find that, situations may come up and then we're like, okay, we need to act on this and we need to do this. And then a few months later, it kind of goes to the wayside. It needs to be constantly as part of our work. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing activity. How do we check on this on a yearly basis? How are we performing against this? What are our employee surveys? The idea is that if it's ingrained to the culture, you just want it to be something that's part of how you act. I find that when I see it siloed, that's where it kind of concerns me, because it's not part of a siloed thing. It should just be part of actually how we operate as a business.
Exactly.
And I think it's encouraging I think somebody said this earlier, that the pandemic has highlighted a lot of things, especially around inequality. And so not only it's not just because we want to change and we want to put this as a priority because it's the right thing to do, but our clients are calling for this. There's the expectation of people that are applying for jobs, that it's just beyond the technical skill. They're looking for organizations to attach themselves that stand for something. We're even looking at, especially when I'm in the space of hiring, looking for leaders that have that emotional intelligence, because it is about connection. It's about your community involvement. And to your point, it has to start at the top. But I'm encouraged that people that are seeking jobs are starting to demand those things of the employers that they're seeking out. So there has to be a commitment to embed that, otherwise you're going to be left behind.
Exactly.
And I think the one risk that we want to encourage companies not to take, I remember back, when there was a lot of talk about environmental practices, and there were big brand name companies who were actively doing things like taking certain types of detergent off the shelves, and they were doing it and not talking about it because they didn't want to do what was called greenwashing. And I have yet to find an equivalent name for gender washing and bias, whatever I don't know what the name is going to be called, but I find companies say, well, let's ask some people to be, women to go up on our website so that we know that women are part of our organization and they see them there, and that yet they're not actively looking at ways to try to recruit women into the company, or they've got a page up that explains their diversity practices and it's just a page of copy and there's nothing following that up. I get very discouraged about that. And Tanya, I agree with you, but I want people to do this the right way. I don't want them to get all fired up about something and pretend that they're fixing the problem when they're not. And
exactly.
We see that a lot.
Yeah, it can't be a numbers game. It has to be genuine. And it has to be, when you're making those type of decisions, you need to have the right people in the room as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we have one party making the decisions for the whole, you're not going to get the answers and you're not going to get the traction that you need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think research has shown that when it is a numbers game, retention isn't good at all. There's a study where they looked at, more inclusive versus less inclusive environments. And there was that's kind of the biggest indicator of a woman leaving the job. In more inclusive environments, women left the job 1% of the time, whereas in less inclusive, it was 21% of the time, at least in tech work. And also there were things like promotion and becoming manager. In a more inclusive environment, there's a much more likelihood of a woman becoming manager and getting promoted versus less. And so even if someone says we have a lot of women, if they're not actually on the ground trying to create a more inclusive environment for them, these women are going to leave, and then they're not going to achieve anything at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
You all are already touching on our next question, which is fantastic. I'm really enjoying the discussion. So how do you go about hiring, but retaining more diverse candidates, particularly women? So how do you avoid this revolving door that a lot of countries?
I can speak to that. So when it comes to hiring, it's just more of what are your areas that you're actually going to recruit people? Are you going to just the popular ones? And if you are, and that's what you've always been doing, you're always going to get the same pool of candidates. So the idea is that you want to diversify as much of your recruiting options as possible, making sure that you're going to like certain networks that cater to women, networks that cater to minority women or marginalized people. Going into schools and, from a very early age, talking about the company and how they operate. So it becomes top of mind for these kids. So they decide that when I get older, I want to work for this company, right? So those are the types of things that we can do. And also when you're actually putting out postings, trying to remove gender as part of the description. Like, a lot of the wording there can be kind of off-putting. Like, when you talk about like, dominant, or I can't put the words together right now, but I mean, like there are examples of we look at a particular job posting, you're kind of like, ooh, this seems kind of like more male dominated per se. So like, for someone, they may decide not to apply for the role, or someone in a marginalized community may not decide to apply. So the idea is that try to make even the job posting more inclusive as well. When you think about like who you're looking at, like, skills are great, but sometimes you have to look at some of the other competencies and say, like, what, they may not have 100% of all the other core skills, but what, I see a lot of underlying things that might be helpful in the role. And the reason why I think that's helpful, that's kind of what's worked for me. When I started in my career, I didn't have a lot of the technology certifications, but someone took a chance on me. And because they took that chance on me and I learned a lot along the way, it boded well for me. So like, that's me paying it forward, seeing the potential in people and seeing how you can kind of move them along versus focusing and having a bias saying, oh, they're a tech person like me, or, they have the certain certifications like me, I'm only going to be picking people like that. Just kind of like open that up and just try to be a little bit more open and diverse to the options about who you can hire.
Trisha, our go-to is LinkedIn, which is pretty
Yeah.
Do you have some examples of places we could go to get a more diverse candidate pool?
So like if you're talking about maybe in particular, like I'm part of the Black Professionals in Tech Network. I'm also part of Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals. So not only Black people, but other minorities that work there as well. There's Women in Tech Network. I can share a lot of those resources with you, but those are just kind of examples of networks that I've set up to bring people together, also talk about job opportunities and mentorship as well. I think that some people, when they come onto LinkedIn, because they're just inundated with so much information, so there might be job opportunities there that you may not see, right? So, even if it's not necessarily a post, but even a group that you create and get that promoted, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, just to piggyback on your point about job descriptions, I think that's a really, really underestimated piece of this. You talked about the language that's used. I'm sure it happens less these days, but I'm sure we've all seen those job descriptions that say we want a rock star or a ninja or something like that. And there's actually software tools out there where you can run your job description or your job ad through those, and it'll actually score your job to see which way it skews towards gender language. So whether it's more masculine or feminine or gender neutral. I think in terms of, hiring and retaining diverse candidates is, I think Lana might have touched on this, especially in technology, and that's where the field that I'm in right now. Even the interview process, if you have 2 or 3 men in there interviewing a woman, and then, you're looking at, okay, how are they evaluating her? How does she feel about this situation? Does she even know if there's any other women in the department other than her?
Right.
And it's challenging sometimes because, obviously the ratios, aren't 50-50 in technology for men and women. So there's definitely more work to do there, but really need to make sure that you get that perspective in the interview process. Ideally also from the HR experience as well. I think in terms of retention as well, your benefit program needs to really, really be looked at as well. Very timely example, my wife just got offered another job, and they said, oh, benefits don't start for 6 months. And she's in the public sector. It's not as competitive as kind of the technology industry is right now. But I thought, okay, it's fine for you because I have my benefit plan. We have a young son, but what if you were a single mother, or what if you, weren't married or didn't have a partner? That company may miss out on female applicants or female candidates because they say, well, I just can't even, I may love this job. It's perfect for me. I can't go there because I can't be without benefits.
Absolutely.
So it's those types of things as well.
Yeah. And just one other thing just to add on in terms of retaining, I think it's also about accepting people for who they are. I think that when people come into organizations, they think they have to assimilate to be successful or to move up. So as you can see, I have braided hair. I've had braided hair my whole career, but I know in some instances that have been off-putting to certain people, and because it doesn't fit in with what is considered mainstream. But that didn't hamper me. I've kind of done whatever I need to do to kind of move myself along. But I think that if people can just be who they are, that also helps in terms of retention as well. Speaking a certain way, right? They talk about getting an executive coach, and you're like, what does that mean? So is it executive coach because you want people to talk a certain way? What I mean? What are those things? And I think if we would just be open to the idea that there are different ways how people look, how they dress, how they talk, and then allow that to be part of how you operate, I just think that people can see themselves and say, you know what, this is a good idea for me to stay, or this fits, right? You look at the marketplace right now, the highest number of women that are leaving the organization and becoming entrepreneurs are minority women. And the reason behind that is because they just don't see themselves. So I think the idea is that we need to see ourselves in our true form with our hair, our talk, our clothes. And I think if we allow that to be people be themselves, I think that would go a long way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next question is a little bit picking up on questions and words that have been said before in this webinar. So a lot of notions of mentorship and sponsorship. So in your opinion, what is the difference between the two, and what role do leaders play in each of these?
I'll take a stab at that. So I think we can all agree that nobody gets to a destination by themselves. And that you need some support, and you need a network. And so when you think of mentorship and in the workplace, especially from a female perspective, we recognize that, sometimes there's something called the old boys club, where they do have those type of golfing events. And by the way, I had to learn how to play golf in a sales environment. And I actually do enjoy the sport, but I had to do that so that I could participate in those type of events. And so mentorship becomes very important because people need that guidance, that safe space to go to run ideas by. This person would really take on the role of helping them thrive on their career journey, making those suggestions, introducing them to their network. And I think that becomes important as you want to build your brand and to get people to know who you are, but also have that safe space where you can have those trusted conversations. And for women, generally, previously, that wasn't there. And so we had to source that elsewhere. So I think that's very important for an organization. The fact of sponsorship, the higher you climb, you need more than one person to speak up on your behalf. And this is somebody or people who really know who you are able to talk about, giving you that chance, looking outside the regular boundaries, especially when they have certain stereotypes of who should be in leadership. So I think that becomes even more important. So I think you need both. You need that mentor, you need that safe space, because you want to be able to have a free-wheeling conversation where you can be your true self and show up in that format, as authentic as you can be. But you also need those sponsors who know you, who can speak up on your behalf to help move you forward and have a vested interest in your career, because it takes a village. And I think we're slowly starting to see that we need to open that village up, especially for women.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this really kind of comes in all forms, like especially even in today, like references are such a big part of hiring, or even, you know, promotions. And you need to realize that your word does go a long way. Like when you do endorse a candidate or you do endorse someone, this will impact, you know, what the rest of their trajectory is like. And one example is, I was in my first year of university, and I remember I would go to my professor after I attended a conference, and I told him, you know, I went to this conference and they were talking a lot about how, like, I told them, oh, we should, you know, have more data transparency, we should do all of these things. And then they really shut me down because I was really challenging the company who was giving the talk, when I told them that you're not maintaining the privacy of your customers. And I remember telling my professor, I think I've lost hope in this domain because, you know, after I spoke what I thought was the right thing to do, I was called out in front of everyone. And I remember talking to him after, and he's like, this is why you need to stay. And this is why you need to we need more people like you over here. So I think even hearing that from someone that you look up to very much, hearing that you're someone who does belong in this field was really helpful. And I don't know if that's mentorship or sponsorship, but it's kind of like giving someone feedback that they do belong in a domain that maybe they don't feel like they belong to very much quite yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I want to jump in on that. The difference between mentorship and sponsorship in my mind is very, very different. Being a mentor means helping somebody understand how to handle things in their current career and help them because they've been there before, guide them to the next step. But sponsorship is about being brave and standing up and saying, this person needs to be moved to this role, or I've got a job at another company for you. I think you're going to be great, and here's why. And so what I would challenge everybody on the panel discussion today, and people who are listening, think about in your own life who you mentor and who you sponsor. Do you do both? Do you have both? Because they are two very different things, but they are two incredibly important things that everybody needs in their life. And you need mentorship, and that can come in the form of many things. But sponsorship is about somebody saying, I'm going to get you the next job. I'm going to get you to the next level. I see potential. This is what I'm going to do. And we all need both, and we all need to be both. And if we aren't willing to do that, that's going to make it even more difficult for women going forward. So we need to have both. We need to be both. And I would ask, you know, people listening today, think about that in your own life and really make that a priority. Because if you don't make it a priority, we won't get the next group of women into the sector.
So
Yeah, it makes me reflect and think about ways that I could be a better sponsor and mentor also. And sometimes what I find is it can come naturally for people who are like you to be, you know, mentees and sponsors and strike up that connection. I think we really have to, people in leadership have to be very diligent about recognizing that it's not easy for everyone, and finding a way to create some space and to actively, you know, think about ways that we can be helping those who it doesn't come as naturally to. And, you know, I think that's a good thing to reflect on, especially in a day like today.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Next question. Can you speak about what intersectionality means to you and how about their DEI initiative?
So from a intersectionality to me is I'm a woman, and I'm also a Black woman in the corporate space, and those two things are those two things are a part of who I am, and also are a part of my journey and my story. And I think in light of all the conversation today, I don't necessarily see myself in positions, senior positions, and what can I do to also open up that space. But when I look at it from a DEI perspective, it's to take that all into consideration. I think Tricia said it earlier, being encouraged and allowed to feel free to bring your whole self to work and what that entails. For me, it's being able to your point, have my hair curly and be natural. It's also to educate and have others understand what we mean by microaggression, because there are expectations that you have that are associated when you see me appear in a square for a meeting. Simple things where if I say something that's articulate, I'm praised because that probably didn't cross your mind that I could speak that way. So it encompasses a lot of things that you have to deal with, but really it's about being encouraged and able to bring your whole self to work and having structures and that are in place as policy as well as training to understand what that means and how you foster that type of environment in the workspace for somebody.
You know, I struggle with labels. I've always struggled with labels, and I struggle with this word intersectionality for many reasons. So I'm going to be a little bit contradictory on this. I think we need initiatives where people are understanding race, class, and gender, and how all of those things need to come to work in order to create a diverse environment. But I get frustrated when we keep labeling things. And there I was just a few minutes ago saying we need another word for greenwashing in the workforce. So I think, you know, it's been proven time and time again that companies that are diverse and celebrate race, class, and gender across their workforce do better than those who don't. Companies, and it's so sad that we have to keep looking at the bottom line of things, but we do. And that's maybe why certain industries and certain companies have had such a hard time changing. And when you put people first and you, to your point, allow people to show up. And again, you know, I have to say the pandemic probably did a lot for this, because suddenly everybody was on camera, working virtually, working remotely. I know personally, I've worn a lot of track pants in the last 2 years, and nobody's noticed. And nobody cared that my hair wasn't done that day. I still showed up anyways. And I hope that this is a new beginning for all of us, because now we are allowed to show up the way we need to show up, and there should be no surprise anymore. And I hope that it has been allowed us to be more transparent, more open, more accepting, because we've had to blow up what the workforce looks like. And I love that. I would just love to be able to take the labels away and have people do it, businesses and leaders do it, because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I would love to see. That's my hope for the future, is that we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. We're not ticking boxes, we're not filling quotas, but we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And it's the right way to be innovative and successful as a business. And that's my dream. That's my wish.
Yeah, good point, Marie. So I agree. Like, you know, the idea is that we want to make sure that this just becomes of how we operate as a company, as a country, as just a people. And I think I understand where you're coming from in terms of labels, but I think the labels are important because the labels kind of bring an essence of who you are. So like when you hear comments around where I don't see color or I don't see gender, you know, I think the intentions are there in terms of being really genuine and saying, you know, I see you who you are, but part of that is who I am, and that's accepting the essence of who my individual, my person, who I am, right? So like, you know, I identify as a Black woman, and, you know, there's a lot of complexity around that. And, you know, sometimes seeing that and recognizing that is also very important. Because like, you know, when you see especially situations like with the Me Too movement, you know, when that became like really heightened, like, you know, a lot of women had PTSD. Right. So it's kind of like, and I think, you know, you come into work and you just have to operate as if nothing is going wrong. Like, you know, especially with the whole George Floyd thing came up as well, you know, there's a lot of like media attention to that, you know, a lot of Black people just kind of had to pretend like everything was okay, you know, and, you know, and it's hard, right. You know, because that is part of who I am. So I agree, labels can be dangerous, but I think that there has to be some leniency around, like, you know, like labels are important in the sense of like, welcoming and understanding who people are in their true essence as well. So
that's a great point, Tricia.
Yeah,
that is a very good point.
But I understand your intention. Like, I guess the idea is that we just want this to be normal. So like, you know, like if I go and I see someone, if I see a certain number of women in leadership positions, that just becomes how we operate. I totally agree. But I think also is that, you know, bringing your true essence to your workplaces, to your friendships, to your families, also accepting, like, you know, there are kind of like labels that we need to consider as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's a great point, Tricia. Especially, we did a lot of work around, you know, getting employee feedback. You mentioned the George Floyd and sort of the pandemic setting the tone. And a lot of it is that we have grown up in a society where we are not, we don't want to be seen like there's no difference. And we understand that, but that is part of feeling excluded and not excluded. You're not seeing me for who I am. I am a Black woman. For you to recognize that. And that was part of being able to be seen and heard. And ideally, it would be great if we could get to a state where we don't need the labels. And I think it's conversations like this that start to open that up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you guys. And one more question before we get put our attention to questions from the audience. But to close off, perhaps, how do we become better active allies?
I think more conversations like this. I think we need, again, these are hard conversations. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to have the hard conversations. And when we see things in the workplace, particularly, or in companies that don't seem right, we need to be brave enough to put our hands up and say something.
But also be open to allowing people to speak on those things. Like very early in my career, you know, I saw things, I experienced things, and I couldn't really speak on it because I felt some sort of retribution, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
You know, and then, you know, and then later in my career, you know, become more self-assured, more confident. And you're just kind of like, if they don't like it, that's okay. I'll go find someone else that does. But that shouldn't be the case. I should be able to stay in my workplace, stay in organizations, and be able to speak my truth. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it may translate. Sometimes I just need to be heard, you know? So, yeah.
I think being a good ally means there has to be action, right? So I can say, obviously I support women in the workplace. I support, you know, people of color. But if I don't do anything about it, you know, it's not really helping anybody or helping the situation. So what are some of the action items an ally can do? So again, when we talked about mentorship versus sponsorship, both are great, but you know, how do you kind of open some of those doors for people that you're allying with, and make sure that you're normalizing some of those groups a little bit more in the best way that you can. Obviously, I might have a little bit more authority in my role. I can hire women. You know, it's up to me. If I want to hire women on my team, I'll hire a woman. It's a little bit easier for me. I'm in HR. I'm typically the minority when, but you know, I have that. So being an ally, you know, I can't call myself an ally if my entire HR team is male, right? So it's hiring, not just hiring, it's action, I think, is the biggest piece there.
100%. Yeah, because we see
proactive action too. If you just wait for someone to ask for you then to take action, I don't think that's enough. I think you have to, if you're in a position of leadership, you have to proactively find ways to support people.
Right.
And I also think if you don't know the struggles that someone else is facing, then there's no way for you to understand what you might be doing wrong or how you can help. So I think for allies, it's good to try to read and learn and understand, you know, and empathize and start to think about what biases you have and start to challenge them. Because I think that it's great to take action, but some people don't even know there's a problem. Like they don't really realize that women experience things differently. And I think once they start to understand that, then they can start catching themselves, and then they can start to justify, you know, doing this action that they need to do.
Thank you, everyone. So we've got actually a question related to a very actionable item and an HR specific question. So what are the legal implications of posting a job or recruiting for a position that is exclusive to women only? Are there any positive, negative impacts that HR should be aware of to prevent conflict or criticism?
I can jump in on this one. there's definitely still, even though you're trying to do something positive, there's still employment law that you have to follow and human rights law that you have to follow. So you can't necessarily explicitly call out that you're looking for a specific gender or ethnic group or whatever it is. But what you can do is ensure that you're making sure that your job ads are inclusive, making sure that you're not just posting to the same generic, Indeed and LinkedIn, like you're looking at women in technology and all these other groups and doing research to do that. So there's definitely legal implications. Anything that is, a man has just as much of a right to sue an employer for gender discrimination as a woman. So you have to be careful with the language that you're using externally and internally on some of these things. So you still want to be, you still want to follow the law, but there are other ways to attract, women or people of color to your organization as well.
And we have a question from the audience as well for Lana and Trisha. Can you tell us about moments in your career where sponsorship was pivotal to your progression?
Would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there were a couple times actually. That professor that I had talked about was the person who emailed me a couple months later and said, hey, I have a position that I think you'd be really good for, because one of my colleagues asked me if I know any good students, and I think you'd be great for this position. And so this is an example where I had someone who was vouching for me, and then I needed to do an interview and I had to go through that whole loop. But that was actually the first opportunity that I had and that I was able to really take on. And after that, it was just like a domino effect where, I would go to my professors and I would work with them. And then if they like working with you, then they would ask you to work on a project with them over the summer. And that summer project allowed me to put it on my grad school application, which allowed me to get into graduate school. And like all of these things really tie into each other, because when you empower someone, you allow them to really progress and learn and grow. And then what I've been doing is now I've been mentoring other women. And so passing that along, and I really love to sponsor more women in terms of referring them to different positions and all of that stuff. But it really does have an impact, and that's how it's impacted my career.
I've been very lucky. I've had a lot of good sponsorship in my career. People have recognized a lot of what I have to offer and just kind of remove the idea around whether I'm a woman or not, which has, been very helpful. So when I talk about, especially early in my career, when I was working at TD, I worked on a very large program where there's a lot of moving parts, and, there's a lot of changes in roles, and a male in leadership position advocated for me to be able to take on more of a leadership role in terms of leading some of the work streams. I didn't ask for it. I wanted it, but I didn't ask for it because I didn't think that it was going to be accepted, because again, I didn't think there was going to be a recognition, but he advocated for me. He was in meetings and he said, like, Trisha's best qualified for the job. And it wasn't about a bias or anything like that. It was more like, this is the most qualified person, she can do the job. And that opened up so many more doors for me, because it exposed me to more leadership, exposed me to more colleagues, exposed me to so many other people, which then opened up more opportunities for me as well. So I've been lucky in that respect, and then when I moved into consulting, I had a lot of women in leadership positions that also supported and sponsored me as well. When it talks about projects that were coming up, they'd be like advocate for me to kind of help and support being on those projects. So I've been very lucky in that respect, and when I see those things, I want to pay that forward. So I do that very much in my career right now. It's like, I see people that may not want to put up their hand because they're fearful or they're just not comfortable doing that. I make sure, that I speak on those things and make sure that I pay that information forward as well. But I've been very lucky in that regard.
Thank you so much. I hate to stop this now. I'm enjoying this PM at least. I'd like to say a big thank you on behalf of Bernie Group to our outstanding speakers for your contributions in making this event possible today. And we thank you for your time and commitment to efforts to make positive change in the workplace and really helping us, learn from your experiences as well. And also thank you to all those who tuned in for your time and attention today. We hope that you can walk away with some learnings. I know I definitely am. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Thank you once again and have a wonderful day. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.